Hey guys, this is Cave. I'm a teacher at Roseville Area High School, and I'm joined today by Nick Paladian. Nick is an attorney for the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis. Welcome, Nick.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again, as always. So this is a vlogcast as if it was Friday, April 9th. Okay, we got to catch up a little bit. So I'm not going
Fair
to
enough.
pretend, I'm just going to put it out there. So we've seen the prosecution, and they have 38 witnesses that will testify for the prosecution. Have they made their case?
I think they have. I think they've done exactly what they needed to do for the most part to get their point across for each element of the case. They went through, obviously, and sort of placed the jury at the scene with the bystander witnesses. Obviously, George Floyd is dead. There's no question about that. They got into the use of force experts by saying, you had the top brass, essentially everyone affiliated with the Minneapolis Police Department currently came in and said, hey, including the chief of police, this was not an okay use of force. This was unreasonable. Even if we are taught that technique, it's only okay to do it for a few moments. And then once that person's under control, you can't do it anymore. So you had all of the MPD come in and say that. You had some professor, a professor, an expert, a lawyer, former cop himself come in and say the same thing to that effect. You had all of the medical folks come in saying, every type of ologist you can think of to talk about the heart, the lungs, saying based on our analysis and our assessment, it was not drugs that caused his death. It was not heart failure or heart disease, any pre-existing condition that caused his death. It was the actions of Derek Chauvin. Now, they did say, yes, it complicated these things. There was some interplay between the two, but for that knee, but for the actions in that 9 minutes by Derek Chauvin, George Floyd would have been just fine. So they've sort of seemingly ticked all those boxes. They've squared everything up pretty well, as best as I think that they can. Dr. Baker, the Hennepin County medical examiner, I think was one of their weaker points. He seemed a little wishy-washy. He still maintained that it was his opinion that Derek Chauvin, that George Floyd did not die from drug use, did not die from random heart failure, diabetes, anything like that. So even him being the weakest point, they still brought in 4 or 5 other experts medically to say, hey, here's what we've got for cause of death. There is no question about this.
So you bring up one of the 2 people that I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about Dr. Baker. So during cross-examination, it was like he was agreeing with every single thing that the defense was saying. So is it possible this? And is it this and this? And he kept saying, yes, yes, yes. Then when the prosecution got their final word, they said, Dr. Baker, in your opinion, before you stated it was because of the knee that George Floyd died. Is that still your opinion? And he said, yes. So how does that play with the jury? It sounded, I was watching, I'm like, and then at the end, it's almost like when he said, yes, he was murdered by the knee, or, the action there, almost contradicted everything that the defense was asking before. Did I get that wrong? Is that your feeling as well, or no?
No, it's a really good question, and it's sort of almost the sign of a good cross-examination, right? One of the things that they teach you, and in law school and in practice, is to try to get the witness that you're cross-examining to agree with you. You want that witness to say yes. You want them to be agreeable, and you want to show the jury that, hey, that person is agreeing, just like you mentioned, that person's agreeing with the defense attorney. There must be something here, or maybe there's something here. So, and I think Dr. Baker, too, seems like a very practical and straightforward person. Of if something is being offered up to him that is technically true or technically possible, he's not going to fight it. He's going to agree with it and say, yes, that scenario you described, sure, it is possible. Maybe it's not likely, but it is possible. Yes. Doctor, heartbeats elevate when somebody takes methamphetamine. Yes. Yeah. Is that necessarily harmful or detrimental to the state's case? No. Is it good for the defense? Yes, but it's also just a minor point where think about if he said no, right? If you asked a medical doctor, hey, doctor, you'd agree with me that illicit drugs are bad. You know, if the doctor says, well, no, they can actually be good for you, it just could look kind of silly. But I think just what you pointed out, the state finished as strong as they could by ending with that on redirect, saying your opinion was then the actions by Derek Chauvin, and that remains your opinion today. Yes. Was he their strongest witness? I don't think so. For many of the reasons I think you just pointed out, and he was a little wishy-washy at points, but I think they got out of him what they needed to get out of him.
So the other witness that I wanted to talk about, the expert witness, and it was, and I forgot if he was from Sweden or he's from Poland or Germany.
Ireland, I think.
Ireland, where it was somewhere European, right? And he was so detailed and so scientific, you know, based on the hardness of the street and this, and the lungs expand this far and the oxygen rate. And how does that play with a jury? Somebody that's so technical and so scientific, is it like, well, screw this guy, he's speaking way over my head? Or is it like, oh my God, this guy knows his crap?
It's a balancing act. I really think it's a balancing act. And it's hard because you have to get those things into evidence, right? To make your point, you need that nitty gritty in there. It's got to come in somehow. And it would be really, I think some of the pool reporters said that they did see jurors falling asleep, right? One or two jurors was nodding off or stopped taking notes or was looking at the wall, watching paint dry, whatever. So that's not good. If it's too detailed, if it's too dull or too complex, you can lose jurors and it loses the effect that you wanted, right? At the same time, that's going to be a job for the attorney in closing argument to really tie those things together and simplify it, right? Eric Nelson is not a doctor. Steve Schlescher, Jerry Blackwell, Aaron Eldridge, none of these people are doctors, but they're up there talking about medical things with these experts because they're going to synthesize and sort of simplify these points and these things. So at closing arguments, they're not going to push play and sort of recite everything in as great detail. They're going to say, look, you heard from Dr. X, Y, and Z, and this doctor simply put said that, you know, when oxygen runs out, here's what happens. So I think they're going to try to just keep it as simple as they can for the exact reason and the exact point that you brought up was it's just too much after a while. Yeah. And if you've got 4 or 5 people in a row just droning, I shouldn't say droning, expounding on in that much detail, yeah, you're totally going to lose people.
Yeah. I just thought it was so interesting and so fascinating that, you know, he's talking about the, like, I think one of the questions was, so can you pinpoint the exact moment that George Floyd had died? And he said, yes. He saw the convulsions of the legs, and then they went, and that was when there was no more oxygen in his body, I think is what he said. What kind of impact does that statement have?
I think it's huge. I think it's very impactful, right? It's a very specific question, a very definite question, and having the opportunity to walk through the video with that play by play and say, tell me when, right there.
Yeah,
I think that's huge. I think it's very impactful. And I think he got to go a lot farther than maybe, you know, I think maybe there could have been some objections to that. Again, I say that with a caveat because it's easy for me to armchair quarterback what's happening. They have information I don't. They have strategies that I don't know about. But I think it was huge. I think it was huge, and I think they got to go really far with all of their experts.
So we would expect that the defense gets to go that far with their witnesses as well.
They may. The state is very objection happy, I think. I know they've been making a lot of objections that there's really no basis for, particularly one big one on cross-examination is when they make an objection saying that the defense counsel is leading the witness on cross-exam, and they're objecting to that. That's the whole point of cross-examination. Cross-examination is entirely leading. When you're questioning your own witness, so when the state brings in their witness and asks them questions, that's called direct examination. Mm-hmm. Those questions need to be open-ended because we want to hear from the witness themselves. We don't want the lawyer sort of putting words in their mouth, right? So instead of saying, you know, James, you're wearing black glasses, correct? I would say, James, are you wearing anything that might help you see? And you would say, oh, yes, I'm wearing glasses, right? But on defense, you ask those leading questions. That's a really basic point, but we see the prosecutor repeatedly saying objection leading on cross-examination.
Well, and
So
I suppose that's the whole point, is all you hear as a juror is the witness saying yes, right? I mean, that's what a defense attorney is going to do then on cross-examination. So all you hear is yes, 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 which means, and I think you said this earlier, sounds like the witness is actually agreeing with the defense then.
exactly. And I think what the state is doing in a lot of these situations is just trying to break it up a little bit, right? Even if they know they're not going to win the objection, it still kind of just throws a little rock in.
I was going to ask that. Is that part of I was wondering, is that a strategy? Somebody's kind of on a groove, and then it's like calling a timeout, right? You objection, and it just breaks up the train of thought a little bit, or jerks up the questioning. Is that right? Is that what they do? Is that what?
Absolutely. I think I think it's an unspoken reason for doing it. Every attorney is an officer of the court, and you have an obligation to make or not make motions or objections when there's a basis for them. So I think what we're seeing here is that, especially for leading, there's no basis for that. But you sometimes hear them throw out a few extra ones, outside of the scope, or asked and answered, or mischaracterizing the evidence. So arguable, but I think a lot of them are just to break it up a bit. But yeah, so to your broader point, I think if the defense experts go a little too far, I think we're going to see the state jump in very quickly with objections.
I tell you, it's nothing like a movie or a TV show. Nobody jumps up and says, I object, and you can barely even hear them. Now, is that because I object doesn't happen, or is that because of there's no one in the courtroom and everyone's, separated by plexiglass? Why aren't we seeing, I object, Your Honor? And
yeah, just for the very sad truth of that's not how it works in real life. It's boring. It's not sexy. It's tedious. So I think just from like a general standpoint, for a million reasons, I'm glad everyone's having the opportunity to watch this trial, but also because it's not what you see on TV. It's not dramatic. There are no surprise witnesses. There's no pounding on the desk. There's no get up there and say whatever you want. And you'll notice, like, when there are objections, you don't give a 10-minute speech on an objection and argue it out in front of the jury. You object and you say one word, or if you're going to get into it, you excuse the jury and you have a conversation outside the presence of the jury. Everyone is calm. You're composing. So yeah, it's very technical, and it's very nuanced and slow moving, for sure.
No one has burst in the door and walked down the aisle as the big surprise witness. I'm disappointed in that too.
Exactly. And there's no Tom Cruise screaming about the truth, and no Jack Nicholson, doing his thing. So it's very shameful.
Oh, bummer. So who do you think, as the prosecution is winding up, wrapping up, who has been the best witness? Like the one that really, wow, this person really sold it, or this was a slam dunk, or is that too hard to say?
I would put that into, it's hard to say. I think you could lump that into sort of each category, each stage of those things. So I think Donald Williams, I think, was, in terms of the bystander perspective, I think he was hugely impactful early on. The jury liked him. He was relatable. He kept his cool.
Yeah.
Very strong presence, and really just brought the emotion to the scene, I think.
Okay.
From the use of force standpoint, you have the police, the chief of police coming in there. You have everyone coming in there, but you have the chief of police coming in there, right? And saying, hey, folks, this is just too far out there. Absolutely not. And the medical doctors, I think I didn't get a chance to watch all of them, unfortunately. But I think the Irish gentleman, was she the toxicologist or the pathologist? I think maybe she was the Dr. Thomas. I think Lindsay Thomas, I think, was her name. I thought she was very good. And the most recent doctor they had on the other day also could do infomercials. He's like incredibly cheerful and like could be an actor. He just knows how to talk to a jury. So I thought he was very good. So maybe, you know, those 3 or 4 or 5 folks, I think were really good. But in each stage, I think they absolutely had at least one person to really get done what they needed to get done.
And that's what matters, right? I mean, you have this mountain of information and witnesses, but then you have the cherry on top, so to speak.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. What was the biggest, last question on this for the prosecution, what was the biggest revelation with the prosecution? Now, we talked early on in one of our early episodes, there probably isn't going to be, you know, some aha moment, but was there one? I mean, was there kind of an aha moment? Was there, for me, it wasn't 8:40, you know, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It was 9 minutes and 26 seconds or whatever. That to me is the, you know, almost a whole minute more than we thought. So that's for me. How about for you? Is it that? Is it something else, or wasn't there really anything like that?
Yeah, you know, as soon as I answer this and we finish, I'm gonna think of something and say, "Oh man, I wish I had it."
When I argue with my wife, that's how I am too. I always think.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I think the one you mentioned, I had no idea. I had no idea that it was, you know, an extra 40 seconds or an extra minute. You know, that was massive. I know there were a few things that I'm just not thinking of at the moment, but there was no, there was no massive like jaw-dropping moment, but just having that timeline clarified was really like, wow.
Okay. Well, Nick Palladian Esquire, I appreciate your time. Why don't we talk to you next week when the defense or the prosecution rests and the defense starts interviewing witnesses.
Sounds good, James. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Nick.